Good evening, everyone. Calling the Town of Hingham Board of Selectmen meeting to order on August 7th, 2018. First item on the agenda is approval of the minutes. I'll entertain a motion to approve the minutes of July 24, 2018.
I move we approve the minutes of July 24, 2018 as written.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Public comment? Yes.
Beth Rockoff, 36 Pleasant Street. I'm here because I'd like to ask for your help in understanding what's going on in the center of town with the Lincoln Building. Many years ago, I sat on a committee that discussed the demolition of the building, and there was a long process between planning and historic as far as coming up with plans to make what was the existing Lincoln Building reappear as close a picture as it was. There are pictures down around the fence of what was approved, and what I'm seeing as you drive down into the center of town, I know one of the things that was a real point was to be able to see the new North Church and have the streetscape similar. And there are drastic changes to the rooftop from what was, I thought, approved. And so I'm asking what the procedure is once a committee, a planning board, which I know Paul Healy sat on, makes a decision when what appears is different from the plan. What's the procedure that goes forward? How, what brings them back to the planning board? What brings the public notification back in process so that people can see what's happening? And I don't want to take up a lot of time, but I really think that that was an iconic, it's the center of town. It's very different than what was approved after many, many meetings. And I'd just like to know what the process is moving forward and how the citizens, because all I'm hearing is, how could you let that happen? How did that, whatever? And it's very different. So I'm asking your help because I know there are a lot of wonderful volunteers that put in a lot of time, whether they're elected or appointed officials, and they shouldn't be questioned and looked at negatively because they put in a lot of time and wanted something different. What's the procedure? I don't know.
Well, ordinarily, we wouldn't respond to a public comment, but I do agree that there is some significant interest in this. I can tell you, without getting into the specifics, because this board had little, if not any, involvement in the permitting of that, but there's been an inquiry made, the building commissioner is addressing it, you know, meeting with the owner to address some of the questions that have been raised.
Well, I would be happy to reach out to Ms. Rockoff tomorrow and talk to you and explain the process and what's happening to you.
Okay, I think it would be something that the public should know.
Yeah, I understand. It's just not an agenda topic tonight, so it's very difficult
No,
to
and I
speak to.
appreciate that, and I know you have a busy schedule, but I'm just bringing it up because I think there's a lot of concern. It's been a big topic in the center of town, and I think if the town knew what the process was, then maybe we wouldn't get to situations where we are, where,
Although for clarity, it's the square.
excuse me.
Yes.
I live in the center, I
Yes,
apologize.
exactly.
Thank you for bringing it to the board tonight.
Thanks, Beth.
Okay, moving on, we're going to hit the agenda now, and that's the application for a livery license, Mars Transportation. Is Mars here? He is here.
Hello, everyone.
Hello.
Hi, how you doing? It's my understanding that there's been an adjustment made with respect to the coverages.
Yeah, we raised the insurance for 100,000.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you very much for doing that. Just so the public has an understanding of what's happening here, this gentleman has increased the insurance coverage on the vehicle that he's using as a public livery. So there'll be a remedy to an occupant if there's a misfortune. We all said otherwise, Tom?
Yeah.
Ready for a vote?
Yes.
Make a motion.
I'll make a motion to approve the issuance of a limousine license to Mars Transportation, care of Ihor Shalkowskis. I beg your pardon if I mispronounced that. Mars Transportation has been approved for one vehicle, and Mr. Shalkowskis is the sole limousine driver.
Second.
Discussion, hearing none. All those in favor?
Aye. Good luck. Thanks for
you
your
so much.
Hey, thanks for your patience with us.
Okay, next item on the agenda. Police patrolman interview, lateral transfer. Ms. Hicks, if you join us at the table. Chief, you want to give us a little background before we start?
Good evening, everyone. This process actually started a little over a year ago. We were short, we'd run into a period where we were short 6 officers, and we were looking to take lateral transfers. And we had interviewed and talked to 2 candidates who we felt were well qualified for the job. One of them was Officer Brian Fernandez, which we hired about a year ago. And at the time, we were very interested in hiring Officer Hicks, who was working, and at that time, I think she had been on for 2 years in Abington. Abington was in sort of the same situation we were. They were shorthanded, and in my conversations with Chief Majensky, he was concerned that he was shorthanded, and we both agreed that in order for the lateral transfer to go through, we would have to wait a period of time where he had got people out of the academy and his staffing was back up to level. So we've been conversing back and forth, and finally he's back to a point where he's able to allow the lateral transfer. And I think that's one of the papers we have for you to sign tonight as well.
Okay. Questions from my colleagues?
So I'll start. Good evening and welcome.
Good evening, thank you.
You know, it's, job interviews are always tough, but being in a public meeting, and I think you have members of your family here, you know, one of the things, Hingham police officers have to be cool under pressure, so why not start that off with the interview?
Absolutely.
If I could you describe for me what you see, you know, we talk about the term community policing.
Mm-hmm.
What does community policing mean to you?
So the community I police right now is very large on community policing. I grew up in the town. I'm a resident of the town. My children go to the school system that I police in. It means a lot. I like to give back. I'm also trained as a school resource officer as well, and I coach for many years within the community. So the youth is really important to kind of bring back programs that we had growing up, and also make sure that we're making connections with these kids as well. It's very important that they see us as an ally to them, so that they aren't seeing us just as a uniform, and it's something that they feel comfortable approaching us. So I've worked really hard to make sure that I've made those connections with the youth in town, as well as the senior citizens, because they're the ones that come out and vote. They're the ones that you know, really have an opinion with the town. So we have a senior center that's very active within the community as well. So we like to stop by and always say hi and see what's going on there as well.
And Officer Hicks, my last question, you know, could you maybe think of a situation that you encountered on the job, you know, maybe within like the last 6 months where, you know, you had to make a very quick decision about what to do? And could you maybe just tell the board what was the decision you made? Why did you make it?
Sure. I think in policing, you are seeing people at their best and their worst. So you're going to go into homes and you're going to see people that you see out at the grocery store in the community as well as, like, I have 2 children, so there are a lot of families in town that I know personally from my children growing up with them as well. So I think within the last 6 months, I had a situation with a younger youth where there was, you know, a little bit of a domestic violence situation. So it's always difficult for that. So it's great when you can actually kind of sit down and connect with the kid and really let them talk to you and be heard. And I think because I'm in the community and the children, the child knew me, they felt more comfortable kind of approaching that situation and being, you know, able to speak more freely than I think if it was someone else. So for me, being able to do that and getting them the help that they need, the mental health and anything else with, you know, following up with them and staying in contact with the family. So.
Thank you.
I just want to follow up on Mary's question, but I guess before I get into that, I'd say two things. You know, I think we all spoke with the chief over the last year or so about your transfer, so we're happy to see you here tonight. You also present just a very comprehensive resume, both in terms of your academic credentials as well as your training and certificate, and then, you know, I think your good work in Abington. So, you know, you're a very strong candidate for us to talk with tonight, and so again, we appreciate you being here. So one of the questions I think I have, because I think I see it as a little bit of a challenge for every officer on the force, is leaving a community that you've grown up in and that you have direct ties to. How do you get out of your cruiser and make sure that you can make some of those personal contacts in community policing? Because I agree with you. It's you're a resource, your enforcement, the roles you play are varied, and I'm just wondering how you might approach lateraling into this department.
Right. Well, I've been following like Hingham on their social media, which is great. You know, Sergeant does a great job at that. So it just seems like you guys offer, the town as a community offers a lot for your town to go to, whether it's family days, food tastings, things like that. So, I mean, I think it's appropriate and important for officers to make sure that their faces are seen there, especially being new to the community myself, making sure that I'm, you know, at events and working what I can, and making sure that people can see my face and feel that I'm approachable for them to talk to. I will say that I think being a mother and being a female helps kind of when I am talking to people and the younger youth and just everything like that, and just kind of being able to explain to them, you know, that, you know, it's not just a uniform, you know, it's a whole community, and being able to provide and lend myself to them as well.
And again, this may sound a lot like Mary's question too, but I'm wondering if there's been an experience that you've had either in Abington or educationally that helped define who you see yourself as a police officer. You know, what's the core of that for you?
Absolutely. So when I first wanted to go into policing when I was younger, I unfortunately had a relative, my aunt was killed by a drunk driver when she was 13 years old. So that had a lot to do with why I wanted to go into policing, and just kind of seeing the other side of it and what goes in behind it, and keeping, you know, the street safe and keeping the residents safe, and making sure that they can feel comfortable walking down the street and knowing that their child is safe. So for me, that was a big reason. And then over the last few years, I've actually really gotten involved in sexual assaults. I'm a sexual assault investigator for the department, so I do all the sexual assaults that come in. So that's actually really kind of turned my attention. I do a lot of those, and as well as the Plymouth County Outreach Program. So the opiate problem is a crisis right now, and I'm part of that program. So if someone unfortunately overdoses or is an at-risk person for opiates or for an overdose, we go to their homes within 24 to 48 hours. We sit there, we offer them services with a recovery coach, and we also, you know, just provide, you know, any outreach for their families, or because it doesn't just happen to the individual, it happens to the families as well.
Thank you.
I don't have any questions, but I do have a comment.
Sure.
I've had the pleasure of interacting professionally with Officer Hicks. We both work out of the same courthouse, and I've seen her work up close. It's thoroughly professional. I've had the opportunity to speak to the officers that she works with, and she's respected and liked by them, as well as the officers in the surrounding departments. Case in point, this morning we were both in the same courtroom, and the police were all on one side in uniform, and defense lawyers are on the other.
How it goes.
And I was watching the dynamics and I enjoyed it. I think Officer Hicks will be a wonderful addition to the department. So I'm very happy that you chose to select this town. I think that, you know, a lateral transfer, with the lateral comes the culture of the department that he or she came from, but with 2 years, I think that we can inculcate the philosophy of the Hingham police without too much difficulty. So
I think you're 90% of the way there.
that's very good. Good to hear, Chief. Good to hear.
Thank you, Chairman.
Accept the motion? I'd like to make a motion that we extend a conditional offer of employment to Kimberly Hicks as a permanent police officer for the town of Hingham, effective November 1, 2018.
Second.
Discussion, hearing none. All those in favor?
Aye. Congratulations.
Congratulations.
Kimberly, well, thank you very much. I look forward to it. Thank you very much. Welcome to Hingham. Thank you very much.
Thanks for being here. Thanks for coming, everybody. Thanks, Chief.
I'll be back. You'll get rid of that evening.
Okay, moving right along, we're now going to discuss the project eligibility application for 302 Whiting Street. And we have the pleasure of having Ms. Wentworth join us at the table. Good evening, Emily.
Hi, Emily.
Okay. What are we doing?
So, this spring, you heard a request from Habitat for Humanity and the Hingham Affordable Housing Trust for the Board of Selectmen to sponsor an application to DHCD, the Department of Housing and Community Development, for a project eligibility letter under the Local Initiative Program. Sorry for all the jargon.
Alphabet soup.
Right. So the board reviewed over the series of a couple of meetings a proposed plan for 3 units. You requested that Habitat reduce the density of the project to 2 units, and then voted to authorize the chairman to execute the application and submit a letter of support. DHCD received the application that was revised as you had requested in June, and then noticed the town, as they're required to do under DHCD regulations, of the town's 30-day comment period. So when a subsidizing agency receives a project eligibility application, they're required to notice the town that they have the ability to comment on what they received. It seems a little circular in this case because you just reviewed this, but nonetheless it afforded the town an opportunity to solicit input from other agencies. And so we reached out to town departments. We did receive some limited comments, so there weren't a lot of departments that raised concern or questions about the project, but we did receive an email from the fire prevention officer stating that he had no concerns or comments at this time, but would reserve his right to continue to review the project through the process. The executive health officer offered a brief list of items that may require relief from local regulations in order to move forward with the project. And we would anticipate, based on past experience, that the Board of Health would be involved in this application if it comes to the zoning board. And then we also received comments from the conservation officer, who simply notes that the project's jurisdictional under the State Wetlands Protection Act, but to the extent that the project would occur in an area that was previously disturbed, she does not anticipate significant concern from the commission. So that's the extent. In the past, this board has sort of collected the input during this comment period and then offered it back to the state. And you know, in this case, I don't know if any of the information you received would change your position on the application originally, or if we could simply forward the comments along.
comments, questions from my colleagues?
I mean, I think you're right to point out that we were aware that, that the development of that parcel would or could trigger Board of Health review. And we heard from the abutters there, and we talked briefly when we submitted the statement of interest to DHCD that there were, potential watershed or conservation issues. So I guess I just want to clarify, this then goes forward to DHCD, but then would come back through the permitting process.
That's
So it's a little
correct.
the process is a little bit clunky.
Yes, it's iterative.
That's a much better.
So, and clunky. So if DHCD issues a project eligibility letter, that becomes the applicant's ticket to the zoning board. That's what enables them to apply to the zoning board of appeals for a comprehensive permit. If the applicant chooses to proceed with an application to the board, there's a new notice that's sent out, it's advertised in the newspaper, and the board would have an opportunity to get into all the technical details and hear from the public.
Okay, because I think when we went through the initial discussion at some length, I definitely have some technical concerns, but they're just not concerns that I think I certainly am in a position to deal with and, more appropriately belong to the permitting boards, right?
That seems fair.
Okay.
And I would just note that I think the comment letters used to get, Karen, a couple of years ago, the comment letters historically kind of came from staff. And one of the things that we kind of started doing a couple of years ago was to bring those to the board to be signed by the chair, to give public visibility to these projects, to kind of let people know that they were coming and give advance notice. So it's a procedure that's helpful because there have been times when the applicant is a private developer. So I think that process improvement, although it's clunky in this case, is still giving public visibility. I'm with you. I think that there are a number of technical things, and that's what we have the permitting boards for. I will just acknowledge that a couple of weeks ago, the board did receive correspondence from the Derby Brook condominiums referencing some different concerns. I read that letter very carefully. I also made sure that it was forwarded to the appropriate permitting boards, because it struck me that that may be relevant downstream. So, to me, I view my vote tonight as affirming the vote I took a month ago. Right. But I did invest the time to review the information we were given, and again, I wanted to get it in the hands of the permitting boards, because they're the groups that will really take action on it.
Right, and I wasn't meaning to knock this. I just think it is like, we did it, and we collected the comments, we're doing it again. It was not meant to be any.
No, and I'm just kind of informing the public, because I think it's an enhancement that this board, that the fact that we're having this discussion in public, I think is a board enhancement that we started a couple years ago, so.
All right, great. Anybody have any questions? I'll take a motion.
I'll make a motion to authorize the chairman to submit a comment letter to the Department of Housing and Community Development, acting as a subsidizing agency under the Local Initiative Program, on the application from South Shore Habitat for Humanity for a project eligibility letter in connection with a housing development to be located at 302 Whiting Street.
Okay, and so it doesn't change the vote that we took the first time around that says up to 2. This is just, we're just authorizing Paul to send the letter, the comment letter. That's it. Right? Second.
Discussion? Hearing none. All those in favor?
Aye.
Next, 4 Heron Way.
So next, the town recently received notice from the owner of a deed-restricted affordable unit in the Back River Townhome development of her intent to sell. And pursuant to the requirements of that deed restriction, she's required to notify both the town and DHCD, and we collectively act as the monitoring agent. DHCD has requested that the town provide some feedback to them before they begin to actively market the unit. Specifically, they want to know whether the town at this time would like to exercise its rights under the deed restriction to acquire the property in lieu of transferring it to an eligible household. We've discussed with the state that it's not likely to be a problem to find somebody who's interested and eligible in purchasing this property. The zoning office maintains a list of interested buyers that's fairly extensive. There's plenty of households on that list that meet the target size for this 2-bedroom unit. And so at this time, it seems prudent to proceed with the marketing, but still reserve the town's right to acquire it at the end of the marketing period, which is generally 90 days, in the event that an income-eligible household can't be found for some reason. The state asked the town if it had a preference as to how the sale proceeds, if it's first come, first serve, or by lottery, and we would recommend that a short lottery take place just because we do expect a lot of interest in the unit, and it just seems fair that everybody's clear on timeframes.
Sounds good. Any questions?
Is this unit deeded affordable into perpetuity?
It is. Yeah, there's no risk that the deed restriction would go away. There is some risk that if we don't find an income-eligible household, it can sell to a non-eligible household, but the deed restriction would remain in place, so.
And with respect to a lottery, do we have any ability to provide any sort of local preference?
We don't on this one.
Okay.
Sorry, not for the resale.
Thank you.
So say that again, if an eligible family can't be found for this unit, they could sell to an ineligible family?
They could either sell to the town
Okay.
or DHCD, the state. If either of those parties opted not to purchase, there's provisions in the deed rider where it could sell to a household earning up to 120% area median income as
Okay.
opposed to 80%.
Okay.
At the maximum resale price, it would preserve the deed restriction, even though technically the household occupying that would not be eligible. And then upon their resale,
We started all over again.
again.
Okay.
Yeah.
And our subordination of our right in this vote, if DHCD, if the lottery doesn't yield a suitable buyer, does our right to purchase spring into action?
Yeah,
Okay.
both the state and the town have
Okay.
the option again.
Okay.
Questions? Hearing none. Take a motion.
I move that we authorize the chairman to submit a letter to subordinate the town's right to purchase the unit at 4 Heron Way, Hingham, in favor of marketing the unit for sale to an eligible household to be selected by lottery, and to reserve the town's right to purchase the unit in the event that an eligible purchaser is not located.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye. Thank you, Emily.
Before you go,
Oh.
I just want to thank you for the hard work you did on Brimstone.
Not a problem. Team effort.
job.
Yeah.
You're here.
Team effort, thanks.
Okay, council. Intermodal lease.
So just a very brief background. We're probably all painfully aware of this process. It's been going on for a couple of years. Very recently, Secretary Pollock and the Lieutenant Governor and Scott Bosworth at the MBTA have been instrumental in moving this forward. Real Estate Council, Susan Murphy, has been the town's point person in getting this deal done. I'm very comfortable with the terms, and I will let her run through them.
So there's the Intermodal Center that land is owned by DCR, but it is ground leased to the MBTA for 99 years. Pursuant to the special act that brought that building into existence, the town of Hingham is entitled to office space for a harbor master office. So we were able to, and the rent, so the rent is $1 a year. The harbor master's office is approximately 412 square feet on the first floor of the building. It has 2 offices and a waiting area. The harbor master staff also has access to restrooms, a locker room in the building, There also the safety monitor, safety cameras for the harbor can be monitored from his office. There's locked access that the harbor master and his staff will have access to. However, there's going to be signage directing the public to the corridor where the harbor master's office is located, and there's a buzzer. So if people can still visit the harbor master during their regular business hours in their offices, but they'll have to be buzzed in. And that's because there's other administrative offices for the state that need security. The town's lease is going to be coterminous with the ground lease. The ground lease, as I said, is 99 years. I think they're a few years into that, so it might be 96 years that the town has this lease for. The town could terminate at any time if it wishes to with 1 year's notice, so you're not locked in for 99 years. And while the rent is $1 a year, there's maintenance costs related to the building. So that's where the discussion was going back and forth for a while with the MBTA as to how to calculate the town share of that. In the end, there was a lump sum, a gross amount that the town will pay every year. So instead of having maintenance charge and having to pay a share of insurance and having to pay a share of utilities, it's just going to be one lump sum. For the first year, it's $9,000 which is $750 a month, with then capped increases in the future. The MBTA has already approved the form of the lease, and I understand they're holding their signed copy of it. There's a couple of just kind of space preparation issues that Ken has been working directly with T staff, make sure his staff all have access passes, that type of thing. I understand Tom is going to coordinate with Ken so that once Ken feels like the space is ready to move in, Tom will confirm that. And once Tom confirms that Ken and his staff can get in there and start working, that will trigger the lease and the rent obligation. So your vote tonight would authorize the chair to sign the lease, but not allow it to become effective until Ken and his staff can start working in the space.
Questions from my colleagues?
I just want to thank everybody who worked to get this lease document prepared and agreed to, and Ken, thank you for your patience as we work through it.
I was going to ask, should we ask Ken if he wants to go?
Your answer is yes.
The answer is yes.
I think people are already moving into your office here, so just saying.
They're waiting.
Pretty standard lease agreement, you think, overall?
Yeah, and it was tailored to the harbor master. So, for example, most of the time in office leases, there are prohibitions against firearms. We had it, obviously, made it explicit. They're public safety officials. To the extent they're authorized by the town of Hingham to carry firearms, they are permitted to carry them in the space. So those types of, use specific to public safety and harbor master and those types of things are all covered in the lease.
So the vote we take tonight, the lease would be effective as determined by Tom? Like, who's gonna decide on the effective date of our signatures or the release of our signatures?
The way I've structured the vote is that you're voting to authorize the chair to sign it, provided that the effective date shall be determined once Tom, the town administrator, can confirm that the space is ready for occupancy. Okay. So Ken's working directly on that. He's the one who needs to get the pass keys and he's making sure that the signage gets put appropriately. And then once that's done, he'll inform Tom. Tom will confirm all of that. And then I'll get a call to say, all right, we're good to go, date the lease, trade signature pages, and Sue will have to cut a check for that whatever partial month, and we'll be good to go.
Right, okay. I'm good.
Questions? Take a motion.
Make a motion that the board approve the office lease with a draft date of July 30th, 2018 between the Massachusetts Bay Transportation Authority as landlord and the town as tenant for approximately 412 feet of office space in the building known as the Intermodal Center at the Hingham Shipyard, and authorize the chair of the board to execute the lease and such ancillary documents as are necessary and appropriate to effectuate the lease, provided that the term of the lease shall not commence until the town administrator confirms that the premises are ready for full occupancy by the harbor master's office.
Second.
Those in favor?
Aye. Thank you, Susan.
Really good work. Thank you. I know it's been a long time, and a lot of patience.
Pages. Well, not this minute.
I'll do it
at the
tonight.
end.
Yep.
All right, the harbor master's going to stay right where he is.
Scooch on down one.
Get to the next item, and that's the, that Tom Carey needs the term for every decade, some legal term, but every decade or so, we have dredging in the harbor, and this is our time. So why don't you explain to the gathered what we're intending to do and the process that we must follow, and
Sure.
specifics of the exercise generally.
Okay, the last time the town dredged was 2009, 2010. It cost just under $2 million, and we took out about 85,000 cubic yards of sediment. That's taken out offshore about 25 miles, and it's disposed of offshore. We're coming up on what we would call our dredge period, which is about every 10 years. We're scheduled to maintenance dredge the harbor. So this past spring, we contracted with CLA Engineering, and they went out into the harbor before the moorings were all put in the boats, and they took depth soundings of the inner harbor. Is it all right if I use the chart behind me?
Certainly.
Just pull that up.
You have the floor, sir.
Can you guys see that? Yep. So they went out to the inner harbor. I'll just give you a little
Bob,
position.
can you zoom in?
So this is, over here you have the boat ramp. This is Whitney Wharf, Kimball's Wharf, and then we have Barnes Wharf and Steamboat Wharf. This blue area is the area that we dredged last time. This past spring, I think it was the end of March, CLE Engineering went out, and they took depth soundings for the entire dredged area, as well as the perimeter around it. And they've determined that there's about 63,000 cubic yards of material to be dredged right now. In the next year, there'll be about another 7,000 added to the harbor. So that's about the amount of material that you can dredge in one dredging cycle, which is from October 1st till February 1st. Last time when we dredged, we had to get an extension into February. They don't really give that extension anymore, so while we have a little bit less cubic yards to dredge, we're about at the maximum that can be done in one dredge cycle. So this is the information that we were able to obtain from the survey that was done last March. Now what I'm looking to do is to sign a contract with an engineering firm to proceed with dredging, the preparations to dredge. It would be beginning October 1st, 2019. So over the next year, there'll be testing that has to be done, permits that need to be filed, and if all these things get done in the proper time frame, and we're able to determine where the funding to fund this expense will come from, then we would be able to dredge, start dredging on October 1, 2019. With that said, if we can't secure the funding, the permits that we're applying for all have the ability to have extensions. So the money that if you were to appropriate these funds and so forth tonight, and we can't dredge at the target 10-year period, all these permits would be able to be renewed to a later date, and we wouldn't lose the permits that we spent the money on acquiring over the next year. So that's kind of the summary of where we are. Dredging is complex. There's lots of things involved in it, so I kind of just skimmed over the top. I guess if there's any areas that you'd like more information on, I would be glad to expand upon it.
I've read the material, I enjoyed reading it. Technical aspects of it I found very interesting. I don't have any questions, I know we need to do it. Just do it.
Yeah, I actually, Ken was nice enough to meet with me on Fridays, so we kind of walked through, we walked through this in a lot of detail because, and it gave me an appreciation for an appreciation and a confidence in the approach that the town is taking. And I also understand that doing this work now and this permitting and preparation will put us in a better standing to potentially receive some state funding. I know we've applied for this year. We may or may not get it, but it positions it puts the town in the strongest position to get some state money. Tom, I want to thank you and Sue for putting together some of the numbers, because, you know, when I read Carol's story in the Journal, $4.9 million, I was, you know, kind of choking a little bit. So, and I realized too that there are a lot of different variables that are at play. What I said to Ken is, I think we should march along with this, and I think that this will also give us some time to figure out how to pay for it. I think we should assume that the town has to go it alone. If we're fortunate to get a grant, that'll give us 2 budget cycles. And Tom, what I might also suggest is when we kind of get through this piece, we know we have to dredge every 10 years. So, you know, 10 years from now, there'll be some people different at this table. I'd love to put something in place where we say, you know, every year we're going to set this much aside, or you know, have a plan in place so that we can use the next 10 years to accumulate funding. What I liken it to is in the school budget, Dr. Gallo gets circuit breaker funding from the state. And what Dr. Gallo's done is this year's budget includes the circuit breaker money from last year. So they're not assuming something's coming in. It's just being proactive in funding. I'd like to be proactive in funding at least a portion of the dredging fees so that in 10 years we have a pretty good balance right now. I'd like to continue that and see if maybe, you know, you and Ken look at it and think we need to step it up a little.
Yep.
Ken spent some time with me too. Like Paul, I find it fascinating. I don't understand all of it, but it's very interesting to delve into. Like Mary, I had some conversations with Tom earlier this week on, you know, we know we have this liability coming, and you know, it strikes me as sort of from a sort of municipal fairness, taxation fairness point of view, we're all using the harbor on an annual basis, so we should find a way to accrue those costs so that when the dredging comes along, we're not burdening one particular sort of cohort of taxpayers. I just wanted to talk with you just briefly about the fee table and about the allocations within the fee table. So, you know, this contract's about $155,000. I'm assuming that this bid met sort of the demands that the town sees in undertaking this project. And I just want to be sure that you think you can manage within these kind of breakdowns of fees. And in particular, they talk about these unclassified meetings of being 3 unclassified meetings for permitting, town staff, committees. So it strikes me that if that's what's included in our price tag, we got to be really careful in managing our use of these consultants or this company in appearing before our boards, right?
Yeah, so I feel confident that Foth Engineering, the one that made this proposal, will be able to live up to what they've quoted us here. It's kind of a unique situation. 10 years ago, the engineering firm that the town hired was CLE Engineering, which recently merged with Foth. So there's a lot of the same players that were here 10 years ago will be working again. So there's a lot of retained knowledge. So the price that they presented was significantly lower than the other quotes that we got. It was also lower than the price that we paid 10 years ago, or the estimated price from 10 years ago. And I think one of the reasons it's slower is because they've kind of done the drill and they feel comfortable, with this quote. So I feel comfortable that we'll be able to meet that.
I just think some responsibility is going to fall to you to manage this project, within their
Yes, a
fiscal
lot will
constraints.
actually be falling to
Okay,
me. So
I'd say all, probably.
I'm ready. I'm ready for it.
In your new office.
Yeah, exactly.
New office.
You can have the contract spread out.
412 square feet to plan to dredge.
Gonna get buzzed in, so I feel very comfortable with their proposal.
Okay.
As much, I just do want to point out that, in the fine print there are some instances where it could be higher.
Well, that's
the state will regulate how many biological tests we have to do. They've quoted one, so if we have to do a second one, it could be a little bit higher. But last time, I don't even think we had to do biological testing, so that could be left out completely. So there is some fluctuation within that price, but I feel comfortable that we can stay within the.
Okay, and that's something that if there's some material difference or something that arises, you're in contact with Tom to manage those costs.
And that price is for getting us to dredging, and then
Yep.
after the dredging project, doing the final survey to see what the depths are. When we actually get to dredging, whether we want to hire them or another contractor to work with us throughout it is a decision that we're not making now. We'll make that when we get closer
Okay.
to the project.
Okay, well, I appreciate all your time, Ken.
You're welcome.
Comments from the public? Yes, Mr. Watson?
Jim Watson, 291 Rockland Street. Not a comment, more than a question. Is there a long-term need to dredge the channel in and out of the harbor? Because this is primarily the mooring area.
Inner Harbor, yeah.
Yeah, so this is just the mooring area in the Inner Harbor. From time to time, usually when we're doing the dredging, the Army Corps will survey the channel coming into the Inner Harbor. Traditionally, it's not dredged, but if the channel tends to move a little bit, and the Coast Guard will then reposition the cans so that the navigable channel remains. But it hasn't traditionally been dredged, but we will look at it again this time around.
It doesn't get silted in routinely, it's just...
It
once that
doesn't
great
get
while-
silted in, but it might, some areas might get silted in, but then other areas kind of open up, so the
so
dynamics of the
move the
channel might
markers.
move a little bit.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Yes, ma'am. If you wouldn't mind, just identify yourself by name and address.
My name is Joan Martilla. I'm actually here just listening on behalf of Hingham Harbor Marina. I was just curious how it was funded 10 years ago and how that determination is made.
Yeah, so when we did it 10 years ago, we received 3/4 of the funding from the state, and the town paid 25%. This time, right now, we're pursuing funding for this dredging project. The state does offer there's a grant opportunity out that the town just submitted an application for, and where the state would pay 50%, and then the town would be responsible for the other 50%.
Thank you.
I guess, and just to kind of stemming off your question, I did get some comments over the last week that, maybe we're trying to dredge a year early, or we're kind of rushing or something to that effect. We're not looking to dredge a year early, and we're definitely not rushing. I started looking at this in middle of last winter, which was the appropriate time to start thinking about this. However, in the last couple of weeks, we did kind of step up the game a little bit. The state announced a grant opportunity that would fund 50% of it, so we needed to get that grant in, and it's important in order to meet the timeframes that grant requires that we secure the engineering firm so that we can get going on the permitting to meet the timetables in that. So we're not rushing, we're definitely not behind in trying to catch up, we're just trying to move forward with, exactly, keep pace. I mean, I put the request for the proposals out for the engineer end of June, so we're actually right in time to be securing them with a contract and then moving forward with the permitting and so forth.
Do you have to go before any of the town permitting boards, or is it strictly state permits?
No, we'll go before the Town Conservation Commission,
Commission?
and then there's DEP and some other state agencies that we go before.
And if I may just add one thing that Ken mentioned to me on Friday that was really helpful. He was mentioning how much material was dredged, and he also mentioned that you can't, you can only dredge between October and February 1, and extensions are no longer granted. So what he reminded me of on Friday was that if we wait too long, and we have to do this over 2 seasons, we will have to stage the equipment twice. So the overall cost of the project will rise significantly. So, you know, as we're looking at this and saying, well, we did 85 last time and we think we'll be at 70, we need to remember that when we did 85, we asked for and were given an extension. And, you know, there could be a cost to waiting too long that I think we'd like to try to avoid.
Yep, I agree.
And I just want to clarify, it doesn't mean that we won't get an extension to February. We haven't seen it granted over the last 10 years. So it's still possible to get, but the permitting companies and so forth, agencies, have not really been giving it out, so.
Thank you.
I'll entertain a motion.
I move that we authorize the chairman to sign the agreement with Foth Infrastructure and Environmental LLC for designer services for the Hingham Harbor Maintenance Project.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Thank you very much, Ken.
You're welcome. Thank you.
Good job.
Thanks, Ken. Thanks for the time, too.
Okay, next on the agenda. Water company acquisition update.
Okay, well, I will do my best to be as fascinating as dredging apparently is.
All right,
Yeah, good luck. Good luck.
Good luck. I have a tall task ahead of me.
I'm not seeing it, but, you know.
Okay. So several weeks ago, the board, do you want me to jump in? Sorry.
the floor is yours, sir.
Several weeks ago, the board asked me to look at several aspects of a potential water company acquisition. And one aspect of that would be the engineering and understanding the would-be operations and maintenance and long-term capital investments of the water company should the town pursue and end up in an ownership role. So that's what this is. So we'll go over a few things and some background. We'll talk about the water system as a whole. We'll cover some of the operational issues. We've identified three main issues that we think are worthy of pointing out at this stage. We have some objectives that we would identify under town ownership, as well as what the approach would be should the town, again, should the town pursue and end up owning the water system. Okay, just as a little bit of a background, this is a slide we've seen before. It just highlights the ownership patterns and the ownership of the public water systems across the state. There are 1.3% of water customers in the state are provided water through privately owned water companies. So we just wanted to remind everyone of that fact. The water regulation is done by the DEP regardless of whether or not the water system is owned by a private company or a public company. So what that means is that the DEP is going to regulate all aspects of the water supply the water supplier's process regardless of whether it's owned by by Aquarian or by the town. That won't change. And that includes things like water company and water supply, or water quality and water supply, but also licensing and certifications, et cetera, for employees and people working within the system. Okay, so we'll stick on this slide just for a few minutes as I just try to explain the overview, the size and the scope of the entirety of the water system. We will refer to this interchangeably as the water system or perhaps service area A, et cetera. It encompasses the towns of Hingham and Hull and portions of North Cohasset. So the water supply sources are, we have the surface water at Ackwood Pond, as well as groundwater through several different wells. We have about 12 wells and their associated pump stations, and a booster station in Hull. As far as the water stored, there are 2 tanks, one at Turkey Hill and again one at Ackwood Pond down in Norwell. And then the water treatment plant, of course, up off of at Aquarian's headquarters. And then the distribution system is approximately 190 miles of main This equates, just to put it in perspective for everyone, just over 1 million linear feet of main that's in the ground throughout this service area A. So it's a pretty significant size system. Okay. So as I said, we identified 3 main issues that we thought we would highlight. Throughout the research that we did, we thought it was worth identifying and highlighting 3 main issues with regards to the engineering. The first is the coordination with the town's road building program. So, as you know, we have an accelerated road building program that town meeting approved back in 2016 that allowed for additional funds to be spent to upgrade the town's roads and to bring them into better condition in an accelerated fashion. That said, we believe it would be incumbent on the utilities that we work with on a daily basis to try to coordinate their utility work with that of our road building work, so that we don't end up having to tear up brand new streets after that work is done. We've had some trouble with the water company with that to date. There are approximately 113 roads were resurfaced between 12 and 17, and some or all of 8 of them had mains replaced in those. So, and just to underscore some of this as we go, and I'm not going to read all of the data that I have in front of you on the slide. You can see it, but for instance, in 2017, we had 20 roads resurfaced. 3 of them had mains replaced when we were doing that work, although those mains, in every case, it wasn't the entirety of the street that the main was replaced. It was a portion of the main. So it makes it difficult if they end up with emergency breaks down the road. Again, we end up having to open the road. And, excuse me, just to underscore that last point a little bit, of the 113 roads resurfaced or rebuilt in 12 to 17, 8 actually contained roads that were prioritized in capital investment reports that were made available or that were contracted for, commissioned by Aquarian. And so these 8 streets were identified in 3 separate reports in 7, 11, and 14 as areas that should have had mains replaced. And, sorry, I'm really bad at that. As areas roads that should have had mains replaced in them. They didn't, and then we subsequently paved those roads, and now we have situations where we have roads that are likely to be problematic down the road per these commissioned reports. And for instance, Howe Street in 2016, we paved Howe Street. In 7, 11, and 14, it was identified as a street that should have been had a main replacement done. It wasn't, and in this past year, we had to open the street because we had an emergency break there. So that's the kind of thing we're trying to avoid through an increased coordination program, or that we would try to avoid, obviously, and obviously always are. Further to that end, just to highlight the issue with opening the streets and through emergency repairs, this slide tries to show that 22% of the emergency street openings occurred in roads that were under the 5-year moratorium. So, and in several of those cases, we had roads that were that required more than one emergency repair, had to be opened more than one time. So again, every time we open a street like that, we're shortening the life of the road, of the work that the taxpayer paid for. And that's key as we think about the total costs incurred. Okay, the next slide is our second, begins to identify our second issue, which is unaccounted for water. I thought this was worth bringing up to the board and for the public to see and hear. So service area A this chart shows the unaccounted for water by year throughout service area A. And you'll see that red line running through the middle, that is the Massachusetts standard of a 10% unaccounted for water. And you can see in several of these years, and 4 of these 8 years identified in this chart alone, it was more than double that. So we're trying to limit the unaccounted for water by having an increased capital program to eliminate the emergency breaks in older mains. Is what I would recommend if we get there. The third, sorry. The third issue I'd like to bring up is that the underinvestment that often results in unaccounted for water, the underinvestment in main replacement that often results in unaccounted for water from the prior slide. And this is a slide that was sourced through the DPU filing at the DPU rate case. And what this really shows, and there's a lot of information in here, but you see the second point on the top line there refers to a 10-year average. And that's 0.2%, that says that 0.2% of mains are replaced each year. If you do that math, that you're looking at a 500-year replacement schedule. I mean, that doesn't work, right? So that's the level of investment that we've been seeing to date. And I think what I think I would recommend if the town were to own this is that we would have a higher and more dedicated funding stream to eliminate that type of problem. Okay. So moving forward, just to underscore that, within one of the reports that we used as the source material that was filed with the DPU is the Tata and Howard report of 2014, where it states that the regular rehabilitation of water mains reduces main failures, leakage, and water quality issues. I think what this highlights is that we're not seeing the type of investment needed to avoid these types of problems. And again, I would recommend that if the town were to own this, that we avoid that pitfall by simply funding the system. Okay. Objectives under town ownership. So here we have several bullets. I'll kind of go through these relatively quickly, but the main objective under town ownership is daily operations and quality of service, right, to the ratepayers, to the would-be new owners of the system. We want to make sure that we maintain good quality daily operations. That's something that the town does in all of our endeavors, and should this become one of our agencies, I would expect that we would do the same there. Okay, to accelerate capital improvement, you heard Mr. Asher and Ms. Powers' presentation several weeks ago regarding the potential financial aspects of a would-be acquisition, and I think we saw that an accelerated capital improvement plan would be in place or could be afforded through town ownership. So the other thing that we would want to prioritize is identifying and, where appropriate, adopting new technology. We would improve coordination with road building programs. I think that becomes an obvious win simply by virtue of being a town agency. Should the town acquire this, you're going to have interdepartmental coordination that is easier with departments within the same agency than outside departments trying to coordinate with one another. So that would naturally get significantly better, which again would save money for both ratepayers and taxpayers. Reduce emergency street openings, especially for roads under the 5-year moratorium. We would reduce unaccounted for water through said accelerated capital improvements, and which, by the way, would reduce environmental impact. And then we would reduce discolored water complaints through that capital improvement or capital investment. Okay, this slide, we wanted to speak a little bit of our initial approach and what this might look like. So we would likely engage a contract operator or a contractor to operate and maintain the water system. That would be an experienced water operator. That would ensure smooth functioning of operations and provide access to technical and administrative expertise. The next step is that we would want to have some level of middle management between that consultant organization and the town. We would have a professional person in place that would likely be titled as the superintendent, and that person would be a town employee who would ensure oversight of the water operations and enable the coordination with the town. Okay, then we would also obviously want to, as we do with all of our endeavors, is to capture and report performance metrics to, in this case, to the ratepayers, and through the appropriate town, into the appropriate town committees. We would provide easy public access and visibility, ensure transparency and accountability, and facilitate the evaluation and operations of the maintenance system. Again, this is a standard operating procedure for town operations. So, daily operations and maintenance. We issued an RFP on July 16th. We expect the results of that RFP to be issued back to the town on August 13th, at which point we would evaluate and begin the process of selecting a would-be operator. While those proposals would be binding, obviously they would be contingent. If the board were to move forward to town meeting, but it would be contingent on town meeting approval of a purchase. Okay, the RFP was issued based on DEP requirements. You know, we didn't make this stuff up. It was based on DEP requirements. We had input from former water company employees, as well as obviously following mass procurement laws. Daily operations and maintenance, RFP. The RFP has several comparative criteria, 5 to be exact. The first is an attempt at finding a company that has managed a water company of the similar number of customers. So there's different challenges with different levels of customers depending on the size of the operation. So we wanted to try to find people with that level of experience. The next was to find folks that were experienced with the transition, someone that has experienced a transition in the past, and to make sure that we don't end up with, or that we end up with uninterrupted operations and subsequently uninterrupted customer service. We also want to identify folks or a company that has experience with the water distribution system of our size, and in experience with a water treatment plant similar to ours, which is a sludge dewatering processing plant. We also wanted to make sure that that would-be water management company has experience working with multiple water sources. Hingham, as I stated earlier, has multiple water sources: surface water, well water, etc. Okay. So the accelerated capital improvement idea. We have 3 legs to this stool. We have needs and priorities, funding, and coordination and communication. So speaking first to the needs and priorities of a capital improvement plan, we have identified the capital needs through several reports prepared for Aquarian under their management through 2007 through 2014. We would start with that. We would, where appropriate, apply methodologies used by the Capital Outlay Committee, as well as a town road building program managed by our town engineer. We would commission additional capital engineering studies as needed. We would start with these and move forward as needed. Then we would utilize state procurement process to select the capital improvement vendors per state law. The next leg of our 3-legged stool is the funding. And again, I spoke earlier about the capital investment, but we would ensure town financial analysis includes sufficient funding for capital. That's identifying $3 million, sorry, did it again. 2 behind, all right. $3 million for, $3 million available upon purchase in year 1. We would have a $2 million annual investment, also beginning in year 1. And if you look at some of these multi-year totals, you can start to get a sense for the level of investment the town can afford. And that would be 5 years at $13 million in the first 5 years would be invested in capital improvement, 23 and 10, and $63 million over 30 years. The other opportunities exist for publicly owned water companies in terms of state and federal grants. We are looking into that actively. So, and we would continue to do so. Okay, cost of capital improvements, the town versus Aquarian, the cost of these capital improvements, there are two sides of this coin. The first is the ways that those costs might be reduced include greater coordination of the road building, with the road building program, as we discussed, which would lower the cost to replace the mains, fewer emergency repairs, and increase the longevity of the road, including reducing road maintenance costs. It would also lower interest rates on capital projects financed with debt, and there would be no guaranteed profit. On the flip side of that, we're acknowledging that the town, as a governmental entity, would have to pay mass prevailing wage rates for all capital improvement projects. So, the third leg of the stool speaks to coordination and communication. We would, again, really hammering this home, that we would be coordinating this with our road building program. That town meeting stated 2 years ago was a priority. So we would do that. We would review 5-year capital plan with the governing bodies, the appropriate governing bodies, and then we would publish annual capital reports and make those available to the ratepayers, i.e. the owners of the system in that case. That would be similar in scope to the annual report that you see every year from the Capital Outlay Committee. Okay, as a summary, we are looking at daily operations and maintenance, the contract operations and maintenance to an experienced water system operator. So these are folks that have been doing this before. I am not a water system operator, nor would I pretend to be, but we would hire professionals to do that. We would hire a full-time water system manager who meets the Mass DEP certification and licensing requirements, and we would capture and report performance metrics to ratepayers and town committees. The Accelerated Capital Improvement Program would use existing studies to identify and prioritize capital needs, commission additional studies as needed, adequately fund capital needs per the plan outlined in this earlier slide, and coordinate water main replacements with road building schedules, and publish an annual capital report, similar to what you see from the Capital Outlay Committee. Okay, that was a lot of words, a lot of slides. Hopefully it was fascinating. Maybe not. These will all be published tomorrow on the town website. This slide, there are some addendums to this presentation, some appendices that will help to explain some of the data within the presentation. And then there's also a question and answer document that we'll make available to the public as well, to help clarify, again, any questions that may arise as a result of the presentation. So.
Thank you, Tom. Before I open it up to the public, my colleagues would like to say a word or two, or?
Yeah, I'd like to try to tie a couple of things together with some of the things. Tom, could you go back to slide 13?
13?
Kind of the daily approach in 3 boxes, and I know we have John Asher in the audience who was, driving the financial leg of, we have, for the town, we have a couple different elements to this, so I just want to confirm a couple of things. So first of all, under the proposal to contract operations and maintenance, the town's financial analysis includes, John, if I remember correctly, the town's financial analysis includes a cost for that outsourcing that was a written estimate that we got. So the financial analysis takes that into account. Does the financial analysis also include a salary for what we're calling the superintendent?
Yes.
So.
Yes, the answer to both your questions is yes. The financial analysis that Ed Siegfried and I worked on incorporates a written estimate that was updated twice from a national water system operator. Also, we incorporated not just salary, but enough funding for benefits, pension and OPEB benefits for the superintendent that would manage the outsourcing vendor.
And John, both of those costs, they're growing by what percent each year in the model?
We built it so that the costs for both the outsourcing firm and the superintendent would grow at 3%.
Okay, and so when you and Ed talked a few weeks ago about the cost escalation being 1.6% a year, that includes these costs?
Correct.
And it includes a 3% rate of growth each year?
Yes, and we actually incorporated some additional costs that go beyond the superintendent costs reflected on the chart here. The reason that the aggregate rate of increase for rates is 1.2% rather than 3% is because the debt that the town would issue declines. So you've got costs going this way and debt going that way. The aggregate effect on a year-by-year basis is about 1.2%.
Yep. And I would just make the point to my colleagues and to the audience that any of the debt service on the water company or on the capital would be paid through water rates. So I was just at the Recreation Commission talking about long-term capital projects, and they said, hey, well, if the town buys the water company, will it be competing with funding for schools and libraries? And the answer is no. All of these costs are built into the financial model where they would be paid for by the ratepayers, which would include everybody in the service area.
Correct. Ratepayers in Hingham, Hull, and North Cohasset.
Yeah. John, thank you so much. Sure. Tom, could you just flip to 16, so sort of the three-legged stool? You know, when I would just say to my colleagues, you know, when we were looking at as we've been looking at this over the years, you know, the kind of question is what's the condition of the system, in particular the infrastructure, because you've got, you know, 190 miles of pipe underneath the ground. And, you know, I know early on we were all sort of saying, we got to do a study. We got to do a study. And I think one of the things that we've learned, and all of this information is on the town website, and it's been there for a very long time. But if you look, and Tom, I think you have a binder there of the capital studies that Tom referenced are in that very large binder that he's holding up. And I guess, you know, my own reaction, you know, for the benefit of my colleagues is that, you know, before I invest taxpayer money in commissioning yet another study, I actually think there are a couple of really great studies over there. I think the chronic issue has been there hasn't been the funding made available to implement the recommendations of the study.
And the ratepayers have already paid for the study.
And the ratepayers have already paid for the study. And so, you know, I would look at it and say, if we're going to bring in a seasoned water company operator, somebody who, you know, operates the water system in any of the other communities all over Massachusetts that do this, before we spend some taxpayer dollars, I'd give them what we have. And I'd say, take a look at this. You've got a study from 2007, 2011, 2014. You've got an annual report to the DPU. Take a look at all this. And then if at that point you say, gosh, I need a little bit more information, we go out and get it. But to me, this is not an issue of studying it. To me, this is an issue of funding it and executing the plan year after year over time. I'd make one last point, which is that our expert witness in the rate case has estimated that if the proposed rate case, which includes a capital surcharge, goes through, we would expect to see a 25% increase in our water rates in the next 5 years. So, you know, it's a question of paying. And Tom, if you could just go back to the slide 19, which kind of speaks to some differences here. You know, we know that prevailing wage means that the labor costs associated with capital improvements will be higher under town ownership. But again, and you know, this rate case is just, there's a lot of great information, but just to put that text in green in perspective, in the rate case filing, Aquarian pays 5.87% for long-term debt. the town's rate on long-term debt right now is 2.5%. And every capital project that goes through also includes a 10.5% return on equity to the shareholders. So, you know, you're looking and saying wages are going to go up, but that stuff in the column in green, I think a 300 basis point difference in interest rates and a lack of an ROE is somewhat compelling. You know, I just, you know, I look at all that and say, I'm not convinced that prevailing wages are going to be a big deal breaker under town ownership, because I think we have other things that will mitigate that increase. So, thank you, Tom.
Karen?
Well, Mary, I'm glad that you drew us back to the finances, and Tom and I briefly talked about this today. When you look at the engineering study, even though it is sort of a separate inquiry in a lot of ways, it does tie into, okay, well, we've identified these issues, or frankly, Aquarian's identified these issues, and how do we pay for them? And if I were to look at this in isolation, I potentially would get nervous thinking, you know, oh my God, where are we going to get the money to do this? And so I think it's important, if you're gonna take a look at this on the website, that you also take a look at the presentation that John and Ed and Mary did a couple weeks ago, because it shows you where that money comes from, and it comes from your existing water bill. It comes from the exact same check that you're writing today. It just deploys those funds differently, because we're taking that 55% reduction in municipal ownership costs and we're plowing it right into the infrastructure and effective operation of the system. So really, really good work on this. But as you and I discussed, the immediate question is, well, you know, how do you execute on it? You know, how do you put a plan in place? And the answer is in the multiple pages that Mary and John and Ed presented to all of us last time around, and it very clearly shows where that money comes from, and it comes from your existing water check. So I guess I'd ask you to flip, because you're so good at it now, just to flip to page 10.
Probably didn't show it the first time.
Because this jumped out at me, and it's the text at the bottom, and it says, the company, which is Aquarian, is not in a position to increase the capital budget without the introduction of the RIM mechanism, which is an added surcharge in order to try to implement some of this capital program that they themselves have identified as an issue in operating service area A. So, you know, that just speaks volumes to me when we're saying, on the other hand, we're going to take your existing check and be able to execute on that capital plan. You know, we talked again the last time around about the coordination with the road building program, and you know, I know you've heard a lot about it tonight, but it's a program I think that the town ought to be really proud of. It was this board, well before my tenure, I think Laura Burns is in the back of the room. You know, it was this board that listened to the citizens of the town after a particularly nasty winter, when it was really, really difficult to drive around on some of our old roadways, to say, you know, this is a priority for the folks who live in this town. And so it was really this board, in connection with the town engineer, that looked at allocating funds to what taxpayers wanted to spend money on, and then to come up with a plan to deploy those dollars effectively. And I know sometimes we are disrupted, but it's a very, I think, thoughtful plan to try to hit roads that need immediate help, hit roads that we can repair and save without having to rebuild, and then begin to rebuild, you know, some of our roads. So there's that tiered approach to road building that I would anticipate we'd take on when we would implement a capital program for the water system. But the road building program, and you heard me say this the last time around, you know, part of the issue, folks, is that we're paying for some of this stuff twice. So we're building our roads in order to make them last. We are holding ourselves accountable to this. We're trying to hold our utilities accountable to this. And then we turn around, and if we have an emergency, we have to open that road again. That's coming out of your rate check, right? So you've paid once, and now you're paying again. And so our hope would be to coordinate that in a way that you're only paying once, and that the investment that you want us to make in the roadways, we're making in the roadways, and we're coordinating all of our efforts around that. The other thing I guess I'd say is that, Tom briefly mentioned municipal water companies being entitled to state and federal funding. So that's not a just throwaway line. Actually, the governor set aside some money in his recent budget for public water system improvements. It's an environmental issue, and it's an issue that's important to the Commonwealth. So, again, those dollars are dollars you've paid in your taxes that you could get the benefit of here in Hingham under municipal ownership. And last but not least, I'll say, I'm the tail end of this show, and I'm working hard with Charlie Costello and Josh Krumholtz on the governance of the system. How's the town going to operate it? How will it be governed? And so when Mary talks about and Tom talks about water superintendents and professional water companies that are in municipalities operating these systems, I've spent the last several weeks on the phone with these folks talking through very routine and regular and very effective municipal ownership and operation of these water systems. And that's something that I hope to share with you in the coming month or so. It's a lot of information, as you can see from these beautiful slides. Mine's just going to be handwritten on a whiteboard that I'll erase periodically. But we are gathering that data, and I am talking to these folks, and they do these jobs every day. So really, really well done, and I think it builds on a great financial analysis platform. So
I'd like to add that I'm probably going to say something similar to what the two of you have said, but I have a distinct memory of the neighborhoods of Holland Lane and Wickham Avenue sitting in here, very unhappy about the condition of their roadways. And it was that sustained conversation that we had with those residents that led us to conclude that we needed to step up our game on road rehabilitation, because as Karen says, full-depth reconstruction is extremely expensive. And if we could get to the roadways before they reach that point, we stood a better chance of keeping the overall road network in better shape. So it's disappointing to see on the slide, and that would be page 7, that Howland Lane and Whitcomb Avenue were both resurfaced in 2016, and for 3 consecutive studies, the water main replacement was recommended for those roads. So this is not theoretical. These aren't just abstract arguments that are being made here. And if you look at this slide, I suspect that replacing the main in these roadways is more difficult because of the horizontal and vertical curves in those roadways. The only thing I'd like to add that wasn't in the slide that I think should at some point be considered as well is that when the town permits projects, if we've got an internal water company, it enhances the ability to coordinate the work that goes on with respect to the subsurface utilities. And, there are finite resources with respect to, the second floor's ability to keep up with everything. And there's nothing that beats, a harmonious permitting process when it comes to implementing the decisions that the permitting boards have made. So yet another reason, perhaps not obvious on its face, but certainly as important. I'd like to thank you for the work that you did, Tom. And
I did have one other thing occurred to me when you were presenting this that hadn't occurred to me before, and that's just the level of transparency in the deployment of capital and the improvements to the system that we would see under town ownership. I mean, I think that I think there's a lot of information that gets provided as part of the DPU rate case. There's a lot of information that we've collected, but sort of the regularization of here's your water system and your watershed, and here's how we're operating it, and here's the money we're spending to improve it. just like you said, similar to the capital outlay kind of reporting that shows accountability, I think, to taxpayers. And I hadn't really, that piece of it hadn't occurred to me before tonight, so I appreciate that.
Anybody like to comment? Yes, if you could address your question or comment to the chair. You're welcome to go to the podium. My able predecessor.
Laura Burns, 96 Hersey Street. I'm the chair of Citizens for Hingham Water, which is a community group made up of Hingham citizens who are, and what we're doing is trying to get the information out to the citizens about all the study that the town has done about this subject. We think it makes a very compelling case for why the town ought to buy the water company. But I'm very grateful to have this, what we saw tonight, the town's approach to engineering to work with, because what we're finding as we talk to people is that the condition of the system is very much top of mind for everybody who wants to think about this. And it begins with the fact that most people don't realize, or just because they haven't thought about it, that whatever maintenance gets done on the system, the ratepayers pay for it no matter who owns the company. So however much gets done, we're going to pay for it. Right. And most people are worried about the condition of the system, and why should we take over a system that is in such bad, poor condition? And the answer is very clear, that we will be able, based on the financial analysis that was done and presented a couple of weeks ago, we will be able to put more resources into maintaining this water system than Aquarian currently does. And we did, I reacted the same way as Selectman Johnson to the squib from the rate case that went by, where Aquarian said they are not in a position to increase the amount of maintenance to the system without a brand new surcharge that they have asked for in their rate case, that is for the purpose of maintaining the water system, which you would think was the purpose of the money that we're already paying to the water company. They should be maintaining their asset, but they cannot do it without asking us for more money. And what we have learned is that without asking for that surcharge, if the town owns it, we will be able to put more money into the maintenance of the system. And not only that, control it and make those decisions ourselves, so that when we go and repave roads, we can decide that we're going to replace those water mains and get all those savings going forward in the future. So this will be a very useful thing for us to try to get out into the community, and I thank you for that. And I look forward to the governance piece of it in a couple weeks. Thank you.
Thanks,
No pressure, though.
Paula, can I just add one thing to the, because it's come up, as there's discussion and things, which is the relationship between sort of the condition of the system and the purchase price. And I just want to, kind of clarify that as we were talking about sort of the condition of the system and the amount of investment. The purchase price for the water company is based on a statute that was written in 1879 when the water company was founded. And it basically says, the statute says, at any time the town can buy the water company, but there's a way you calculate the price. And so the litigation that we've been engaged in for the last few years has been to get finality on that price, because you read a statute in 1879 and it's kind of hard to sometimes know the pieces. So the purchase price itself is driven by a formula, and that purchase price, according to our analysis, increases by about $3 to $4 million every year. If the capital surcharge is adopted, that number will go up. But the purchase price is the purchase price. We don't get to say, well, gee, now that our water company has another owner, the purchase price is different, or the condition of the pipes is not as good as we thought, so the price is different. It doesn't work like that. The price is the price, and all we do is every year we update the purchase price for one more year's worth of data. So, as I said, the price is the price. There's no kind of wiggle room on it. So really, as Laura said, it comes down to this is the price for the asset. Under town ownership, more capital dollars, more money can be invested in the infrastructure without increasing rates. But at the end of the day, regardless of the condition, we as ratepayers, and, you know, us three, we're ratepayers, we would pay for it.
Well, I'd like to thank you all for participating in this conversation tonight. This is an ongoing effort by this board, town administrator and our assistant town administrator, and those ably assisting us to inform the public as to the issues that we are considering as we move forward on this question. So I anticipate that you'll hear more later on this summer, and give an opportunity for a robust debate. I appreciate the civility and the respectful nature of the discourse here, and looking forward to it continuing. So thank you. Let's move on to the next.
What's the estimated price right now that you think?
So Carol, as of year-end 2017, and I'm looking at John Asher, 107? About $108 million. And Carol, the financial analysis that John showed is under that purchase price, if we assume a 10% rate increase every 3 years by Aquarian, the analysis would say that under town ownership, there would be $136 million of savings. If the capital surcharge were adopted for just 5 years, as it's requested, those savings increased to, I think it was a little over $300 million. And those cost savings are basically the cost of service under town ownership versus Aquarian ownership.
All right. At this time, we're going to take a couple of votes. I'll entertain a motion to approve the issuance of a special one-day wine and malt beverages license to Peter Murata on behalf of the trustees of the reservations for the Friday farm dinner to be held at Ware River Farm on Friday, August 17th, 2018, from 5 to 8 p.m.
Second.
All's in favor?
Aye.
Entertain a motion to approve the issuance of the special one-day wine and beverages license to Paul Foti on behalf of Type 1 for the Renegade Run obstacle course race to be held at Wampatuck State Park on Sunday, October 14, from 10 a.m. to 2 p.m.
I think I'm supposed to say actually so moved, right?
Second.
So moved.
All those in favor?
Aye.
All right.
We work on
Get
process.
that, I know.
Okay. Do we need to vote on a continuance here, or?
Do we need to vote on that? It's not.
No.
You know what, I'll
Should we
entertain a
vote on it?
motion to continue the matter with respect to GMJ Group LLC, 9 Short Street, Hingham, to August 28, 2018.
So moved.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Okay. Michelle, anything you want to add before we say adieu?
No, thank you.
Okay. Tom?
Not today, thank you.
Okay. Karen?
Yeah, I've been doing some work with the folks for the Affordable Housing Trust on affordable housing issues, and I was tasked, I think, by this board with a to-do to begin some conversations around targeted tax relief. So I want to thank Tom, G. Montgomery, Kathy Glenzel, Barbara Farnsworth, Keith German, and Rick Nolan. They've really been Gene and that crew have been really, and Keith, they've all been really pulling together some comprehensive information about proposals that, you know, I may bring more detail to this board on, but it has the potential to bring targeted tax relief to seniors living in Hingham who are circuit breaker eligible. So, so lest you think we're whiling away the summer hours here, I am doing some work, and I suspect Paul may touch on the Korean Ambassador Medal for Peace ceremony as well as the Little League, so I will leave that to you, sir.
Thank you.
I have two things. One, I was at the Recreation Commission tonight. I want to thank them. They had me come in and we talked about long-term capital planning. So did a kind of abbreviated presentation that this board saw in early June. And between now and our next meeting, I'm going to be meeting with the Harbor Development Group next week, the school committee the week after, Council on Aging, and South Shore Country Club in early September. So kind of trying to get around to educate everybody on the message. And the big thing that I'm kind of trying to emphasize here is that, you know, I know that we have a lot of wonderful boards and committees and great volunteers, and like my message to the Recreation Commission is that while we may have unique responsibilities, whether it's recreation or harbor or, you know, schools or library, I think we all have to remember that, especially when it comes to these big capital projects, we have to put a town hat on and say, what is the cumulative effect of all these projects on the taxpayer? And, you know, I would just say that I'm counting on boards and committees to be putting forward proposals and things that are fiscally responsible for this town. I think we all have a shared accountability to that. And so my hope is that as we continue to talk about these things, that we all remember that we're wearing a lot of different hats. As I talk to the Recreation Commission, I wear a AAA bond rating hat. I wear a looking out for the taxpayer hat. I wear a hat that says I'm a citizen in this town and I like my services and I like my stuff, but it's a balance. I think our government works best when all our boards and committees are wearing those different hats. And so that's...
Well, but you know, I applaud you, because this has been, first of all, it was a lot of time and effort that you put into the original presentation to us. And secondly, you've taken a lot of time to go to each one of these boards or committees. And I don't think people have done that before. First of all, it's a coherent message. And second of all, you've taken the time to go to them to explain it sort of within their unique circumstances. And I really thank you for that, because I think that's what's going to foster, you know, kind of their laser view on their project, but then their ability to back up and see it in context without, you know, sometimes those projects get so far down the road without that backing up to sort of put it in the landscape that it becomes hard to move. And so I really appreciate all the time you're taking on it, Mary. I think it's going to make a huge difference.
Well, and I'm grateful to the boards and committees. We have very smart, very capable people, and we have a responsibility to give them as much information as possible so that they're doing their job in the best way they can. So I sort of view it as a responsibility that we have, and am grateful. The last thing, and it's a little personal, but I never kind of do personal shout outs. Hingham Troop 1, 3 scout leaders, including 2 husbands of women in this room, and 10 Boy Scouts are in Alaska, so cool. 75 miles south of the Arctic Circle. They went into, they're now in the blackout period, so I just want to thank the adult leaders. And you know, we hear a lot about a lot of different events, but I think we have a wonderful Boy and Girl Scout program in Hingham. And you know, my hat's off in particular to our scout leader, Mark Murphy, because they had plans to go to New Mexico. They were planning and training for 18 months, and the wildfires caused that to be canceled. And they were resourceful, and they pivoted. So hopefully tonight they're somewhere safe and warm.
It's good stuff. Good stuff.
I want to thank you too. I think you're doing a great job, and you know the effort you're putting into it. Both of you are just making this a board that I really enjoy serving on. I had a good chat with the library, backing you up on that message. The talks continue. We're waiting for the data to sort itself out on the 3A corridor of Summer Street. Anticipate hearing something from that very shortly. Thomas.
Tomorrow, apparently.
saw the eye roll.
We had a great ceremony last Friday here at Town Hall for the Korean veterans. An award was presented to a number of them here in the community from the Veteran Service Office, Keith German, Lease Potts, the Veterans Council, the kids in the high school, they're in the Veterans Club there. It was just a great day. All of us were there. You know, taking a day off from work in midday isn't something that's easily done, but the importance of this, I think, was recognized by all of us. So we were there for that. I want to thank Keith for putting that together. The police had a great presence there too, and fire. And consistent with that, the Little League raised over $13,000. The Hingham Little League raised over $13,000. And in a ceremony at a game between Hingham and Weymouth, there was a presentation of that. Senator O'Connor was there, Representative Murphy, Representative Machino, three of us, Tom, Michelle, Chief, obviously. It was very moving to see the support of the community for, you know, a fallen brother. So, I mean, it's tragic that it happened, but it's good to see the community support and the response. I love seeing those black and blue ribbons all over the area, the South Shore. And lastly, I'd like to thank the Senior Center, because I have an elderly mother-in-law, and it's really hot right now, and not everybody in this town has AC. So, you know, you can do your job, and you can do your job. And I think the people at the Senior Center really care about, you know, the clients, the people that use that facility, that use that service. And boy, it really shows in times like this. You know, there's some real concern. We're fortunate as a town to have that caliber of people taking care of perhaps, you know, the most vulnerable of us in our later years. So I just want to recognize that and thank all of you down there for that. So with that, I'll entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye. Good night,
Good night, everybody.
You guys-